Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Dawson. Welcome to the podcast. I hope this episode equips and empowers you on your cancer journey. This episode was recorded at our What the Cancer Wellness Workshop in November 2018. You can watch this video and read the article at our website, whatthecancer.com. Okay, welcome everybody to this seminar for What the Cancer, where we're going to talk about diet and exercise and mind-body, things that you can do to stay cancer-free or keep cancer away. And if you've got a cancer diagnosis already, to stay well for as long as possible. We're going to kick off this session with just a brief overview of diet, and we've got the pleasure of Judith Finnegan coming to teach us some cooking skills and what she's learned on her cancer journey. And one of our nurses, Sophie from Whangarei Hospital, is going to talk to us about organic food. So with diet, there's no single diet that you have to do. It's just about learning a few principles that are going to help keep you really well. So the three principles that I talk about with my patients is boosting our immune system, because our immune system is so important in taking out cancer cells that are forming new cancer cells, or if you've got microscopic cancer cells left behind after treatment for cancer, your immune system is able to eradicate those. So we need to boost our immune system, and we need to reduce inflammation. We know that inflammation produces a lot of chemicals called cytokines and other hormones which are drivers of cancer. They encourage cells to proliferate, to form blood cells, and to spread to other parts of the body. So if we can get inflammation in our bodies to the lowest level possible, that's a really good thing. And the third thing we want to do is keep our insulin levels as low as possible. When our insulin levels are low, our bodies go into a phase called rest and repair, where faulty bits of cells are recycled and cells that are damaged beyond repair actually removed altogether by the immune system. So this happens particularly when we've been fasting for a while. It happens overnight if we get if we're without food for a period of time, and that's why intermittent fasting can be really helpful, because it allows the body to go into this rest and repair phase. When your insulin levels are raised, that's actually a time where that signals to the body that there's lots of food around, so it's a good time to be growing, dividing cells, and so the rest and repair process gets halted and proliferation happens. And so if you've got some faulty cells, that high insulin level can actually push and drive cells to grow faster. So the principles of our diet are to try and do those three things. Now, to keep our insulin levels down as low as possible, we want to really reduce our refined carbohydrates and sugars. They're totally a product of industrialization of food. So before the industrialization of food, we didn't have these highly refined flours and refined sugar. And as you'll know, almost everything we buy in the supermarkets nowadays is just full of refined carbohydrates, industrialized oils, and sugars, which make food taste good and also last longer on the shelves. So none of those things are good for us. So we want to kind of try and get back to eating a really whole food diet and having most of our, the basis of our food to be plant and vegetables. So refined carbohydrate free, cutting right down on breads and cereals and pastas and anything with added sugar, particularly fizzy drinks. I'm going to talk a little bit about the microbiome later, which is the gut inside your bacteria. We now know that there's 10 times more bacteria in our gut than we've got total cells in our body, and they do an incredible amount of work in keeping us healthy. When we've got a good microbiome, which is very diverse, so lots and lots and lots of different species of bacteria, our our gut is very settled, whereas when we have a narrow diversity of bacteria, so we don't have so many different species, it allows what we call bad bacteria to grow. And that causes inflammation in our gut, and it actually makes our gut leaky and allows a lot of these inflammatory products and chemicals to get into our bloodstream. And they actually upregulate our inflammatory genes. And so that sets up a whole process of inflammation in our body. And as I said, chronic inflammation is a real driver of cancer. So we really want to try and reduce inflammation in our gut by having this diverse microbiome that's nice and healthy. And again, that comes back to eating whole foods, fruit and vegetables, nuts and seeds. Bacteria feed on fiber, so we want lots of different fibers from lots of different plant foods, fruits and vegetables. Nuts and seeds, legumes are really good. But even things like coffee's got a really good fiber that our gut likes to feed on. And good oils like extra virgin olive oil and avocado oil are full of really healthy fiber that the microbiome likes. The other thing that's in all of those healthy foods is something called polyphenols, and they're particularly found in a lot of good oils, a lot of fruits, coffee beans, cocoa beans or cacao beans that we make good chocolate with. So all of those things are full of these really vital polyphenols, which also really drive a good bacteria. So I think when you know the reason you're putting in good food into your gut is because you're feeding this wonderful garden inside of you that's really taking care of you, I find it so much more motivating to want to eat healthy and feed my good bacteria. Not only do they reduce inflammation, but they make 90, or they're involved with modulating 90% of the serotonin, which is our happy hormone. And we have what we call a second brain in our gut, which is as big as a cat's brain. So all these nerves in our gut, which are talking directly to our first brain, can really modulate our sleep patterns, our mood. A bad gut bacteria is associated with much higher levels of depression and anxiety. And it's probably where the whole thing of the gut feeling comes from, because you literally have nerves that are thinking in your gut, and they are affected by our microbiome as well. So the bacteria are constantly making messengers that stimulate those nerves and talk to our brain. And there's more. So the fiber, when fiber is broken down, it makes these short chain fatty acids, and these get into our bloodstream, and they also modulate our DNA. So they help silence genes that might be cancer-forming genes or inflammatory genes, and they switch off inflammatory pathways. So our genome is really modulated by our microbiome and by the chemicals they make. The gut bacteria also make good vitamins. So there are vitamins that we don't make without our gut bacteria. So I've kind of done the microbiome. So we want to feed and water our garden. The things that our microbiome don't like are sugar, and even more than sugar, they don't like sweeteners. Sweeteners are toxic to your gut bacteria. And then you probably already know that antibiotics aren't good for your gut. They can significantly reduce the population of bacteria. Alcohol, and 25% of the drugs that we use in medicine nowadays also significantly affect the bacteria. Eat good bacteria. And this is what you get in fermented foods. So there's a number of different fermented foods. Quite popular at the moment is kombucha, which is a tea drink that's made with a bacterial and yeast starter culture, and you actually have a SCOBY in that drink that makes this wonderful bacterial drink, and that really can help support your good gut bacteria. And then there's other things like kefir, which is a soured milk, a little bit like yogurt. Obviously yogurt is really good. And then things like kimchi and miso, sauerkraut, anything where there's been a fermentation process. And then there's things that aren't good for your gut bacteria. So they don't like sugar. So fizzy drinks are really not good, but neither are sweeteners. In fact, sweeteners are probably more toxic to your gut bacteria than sugar is. Antibiotics, alcohol, and about 25% of the drugs that we use in medicine have a negative impact on the gut, particularly antipsychotics. And when you bear in mind that a good gut bacteria is good for your mental health, then you really sort of have to wonder about that combination. So just to go back over some of the other foods, in particular, I'm a big fan of encouraging people to eat healthy fats. So I think one of the things we've got really wrong recently in the last sort of 20, 30 years is telling people to eat a low-fat diet. There's no doubt we need to significantly reduce the bad fats in our diets, particularly those that are industrialized. So not ones that occur naturally, but those that are made in the factory, often under ultra high heat processes that can change the fats and make them actually really quite toxic and inflammatory. In fact, trans fats are so poisonous and have such a strong link with causing heart attacks that they're banned in some countries. Countries like America refuse to ban them because they add such a significant shelf life to processed foods that it means that they can truck foods all across America, and this food's going to last for a long time. So huge, big food industry going on around wanting to keep these foods that aren't good for us. But naturally occurring fats, including saturated fats, are really good for us. And especially ones that are made, fats that are made naturally or are cold pressed. So that's things like your extra virgin olive oil and your avocado oils. And omega-3 fats are highly potent anti-inflammatory fats, and they're found in things like fish and flaxseed. So we want to try and include some fish in our diet. And I do say if people don't eat fish, it might be worth taking an omega-3 fatty acid supplement. Omega-6 is a slightly inflammatory fat. It's good for us and it's really vital part of our diet. But what we've done by making a lot of these yellow seed oils and margarines is massively increase the amount of omega-6 fats we're getting in our diet. Our body needs about a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 ratio of these fats. At the moment, we're probably having something like 40 omega-6, which is inflammatory, to 1 omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory. So we've tipped this balance in favour of quite an inflammatory or an autoimmune conditions are probably related to the fact that we're having so many of these omega-6 fats, which we find in yellow seed oils. So I encourage people just not to eat yellow seed oils at all, and stick with your extra virgin olive oil, your avocado oils, eating fatty foods like your nuts and your seeds and your fish. And then a little bit of butter and your saturated fats and coconut oil are fine unless you've got diabetes or you've got a borderline diabetes. So if you've got that, you can't oxidize those fats properly, and they end up forming some inflammatory byproducts. So if you're well and you're healthy, then you're probably fine to eat those. But if your BMI is over 30, or if you've known to got diabetes or pre-diabetes, you probably need to cut saturated fats right down in your diet. And then proteins. Proteins we get from things like legumes, which are your peas and your beans, from meat, from dairy. And these are really important for making the building blocks of our body and making the hormones that we need. So we need protein in our diet. I think meat is okay. I know there's a big drive, for the vegetarian and the vegan. There is no link with cancer if you're eating only a small amount of red meat that hasn't been char-grilled and not processed with a lot of nitrites. So any of your processed meats like salamis and hams and bacons, they can contain some carcinogenic substances. And there are actually some potent anti-malignant nutrients in meat that rival what you find in fruit and vegetables. I think dairy's okay as well if it doesn't upset your tummy. So if any food causes you to have an upset gut and tummy pains, you should probably exclude it from your diet because it's probably inflammatory. But with dairy, I stay away from homogenized milk. They force the fats through a tiny, tiny filter and it completely alters their structure. They're much more easily absorbed. And then the other thing is with the industrialization of dairy, we've grown these high producing Frisian cattle, which have a mutated protein called A1 that breaks down into two smaller proteins, which are very inflammatory. So I try and buy milk that's from Jersey and Guernsey herds. In the Middle East, they still have a very high A2 population of cows. But, in Northern Europe and New Zealand and Australia, we've got these really intensive dairy herds that have this A1 protein. And so what we're ending up with our Fonterra milk is an A1 protein, homogenized fats, and really milk's not what milk used to be. I don't drink raw milk because the reality is although it might be really good for you and contain lots of really good bacteria for your gut, is that in today's age where we're mass producing things, the risk of getting some bad bacteria into raw milk is probably just too high to take that risk. Lastly, just a mention about alcohol. Alcohol is considered a carcinogen. The reality is that depending on your genes, it probably is carcinogenic for some people and not for others. At the moment, we don't know who's who. If you look at alcohol drinking and cancer, it definitely increases the risk for some cancers, including breast cancer. 40% of head and neck cancers and upper esophageal cancers are caused by alcohol, and the rest are either probably caused by smoking or viruses. So alcohol, if you're going to drink it, I'd limit it to just occasionally rather than on a regular basis, especially if you've had a diagnosis of head, neck, gut cancers or breast cancer. I'd eradicate it altogether.